from a woman's perspective, back to your point you wanted to talk about, is you have to be so careful where you're exerting your energy because it has a cost.
Hello and welcome to the Weaponized Marriage Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Hewitt.
I'm your host, Kendra Hewitt.
You got to talk into the mic, babe. All right. And today we are going to talk about a topic that came up as we were attending church on Sunday. We're talking about an interesting topic that our church sent out like a disclaimer ahead of time that they were going to talk about lust.
Well, we're studying the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah. So the Sermon on the Mount, which is Jesus talking to his, what would you call them? His peeps, right? So his followers, and he's teaching them his, I guess, Sermon on the Mountain, right? His teachings. So, and then one of his teachings is about lust. And the way that the church positioned it was that, obviously lust being one of the sins, is confusing to a lot of Christians, I think, because they're taught to, be meek and non-sexual and don't have sex before marriage and, don't play with yourself and don't look at porn and don't think about women and don't check women out and things like that. So I think Pastor Matt did a good job of explaining like
the confusion,
the interpretation of like, I guess it would be like a modern day take on how to make that not so weird. Because I mean, for sure, like you don't have to go to church to know that like Christians have totally screwed up sex for people, whether it, like whatever denomination. I feel like there's so many people that are of religious faith that are really messed up about sex. I'm not saying people that like don't have religion aren't also messed up about sex. It's a very confusing topic, I think.
It's very stigmatized.
Yeah, there's stigmas when it comes to cultures, religions. I know for me, like my parents were young and they were like in the fire of having 4 kids. And I think they just like totally forgot to give me any sort of sex talk. And I figured it out all on my own. So I really didn't have any, like, I think like instruction on how to think about sex, how to treat sex, what it's for, what it's about. So well, look at, so the way that I look at it is like, it's obviously it's a very like we're wired up to be sexual beings.
Why don't you tell us what you think about sex? Because I feel like that's where you're going.
What do you mean? What I think about sex?
I just love that we're starting to talk about church, but we're already down.
This is about lust. What do you expect?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and you for some reason you get.
Do not say that. Do not say that.
You get all wound up when it comes to
no. It's just funny to me. I'm just observing.
What do you think lust is infers?
No, go with
sex.
what you're talking about.
No, you interrupted my train of thought, okay. So now.
All right, keep rolling.
You interrupted me, so I don't even know where I was going with it. But what we wanted to talk about today was that how like sex is a very natural instinct. It's like we're wired up to be sexual beings. Obviously, men more so than women, clearly, right? So guys think about sex, at least healthy men think about sex often. I would say all the time. It comes up, many, many, many times during the day for any healthy red-blooded.
I kind of don't even think you need to be healthy. I think you can be unhealthy.
You can still be real sick and still be thinking about sex. That's true. But I'm saying someone with like a healthy libido, right? So
okay.
So anyway, like I'm of the belief and of the practice of like, you want to support our natural way of being and natural instincts. I think the more that we align with what God intended us and wired us up to like do is it always works out better in our favor, right? And that doesn't mean just to like go spread your seed all over and do that kind of thing, but as far as like sex and how sex is supposed to be present in your life, and then as a married couple, do you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Are you lost or what?
No, I'm just a little bit confused with where we're going with this.
Where I'm going with this is that I wanted to talk about sex And well, the topic of lust, right? And how, like, for men, I can talk about it from a male perspective, right? So, like, if there is a beautiful woman, how it's like we're yeah, in the Christian sort of narrative would be like, oh, don't look at her because then you're thinking about something that's sinful and evil if you check her out and think she's attractive. Whereas I think Pastor Matt did a good job of explaining, like,
Difference
how can you
between
not, like, notice a beautiful or attractive woman? Now you have the choice of whether or not to, like, obviously, you're not going to be, like, checking the person out and staring at them, right? There's, like, a healthy amount of, like, "Oh, there's an attractive woman.
or there are
Cool."
definitely men that do that
For sure,
though.
but, you don't wanna be like, there's a fine line of, like, checking out versus, like, creeping out, right?
That's a
But
good one.
here's the thing, like, just because if you're a man and there's a beautiful woman, say, at the gym who's, like, you know, dressed up in one of those, like, bodysuits and there's just, like, boom everywhere. It's like, okay, well, you can't help but notice that. Well, and it's okay to and here's the thing is, like, it's okay to notice that stuff. Like, it's not like
They want to be noticed.
totally, that's the reason they're doing it, right? But here's where they draw where he was saying Jesus was explaining, like, the difference between lust and, like, say, like, a natural attraction or, like,
Mhm.
something that you're noticing would be like if you stare at that and then start to fantasize about that and start to think about what you would want to do with that, right? Especially if you're, like, a married person, then you're getting into the territory of, like, I think sharing your mind, your mi how do I put it like this? The way that I think
Mm.
about it is, like, sharing my sexual energy with other people, okay? So this is the topic of the podcast. This is how I'm bringing this kind of full circle. What I the message that I received and where I've screwed up in the past and how I've figured out how to channel my sexual energy to the places that I want it to go is like, okay, when there's a beautiful woman, it's like you can appreciate that, but then you go back to what you're doing and you do your next set or you, like, dig further into your
There's no
audiobook you're looking at.
pursuit of the
Pursuit, that's it, yes. So there's no pursuit of the feeling that might come up if you so the examples that Pastor Matt gave was like, it doesn't even have to be in your immediate vicinity, right? It could be, thinking about past sexual experiences you had with other people, right? So if you're thinking about an ex, for example, like, listen, if you're having sex with your wife and you're thinking about someone else, there's a big problem. Yes?
Mhm.
Okay, so sharing your sexual energy or having that lustful energy with somebody other than your spouse and how to be protective of that energy. This is, like, the topic that I wanted to share today.
Mhm.
Okay?
Okay.
And I think it's really valuable because I think for a lot of people, this is how the drift happens.
Mhm.
Okay? It doesn't start with, like, "Oh my god, I went out one night with my buddies and I decided to cheat on my wife." Like,
Mhm.
that doesn't happen. Like, "Oh, I went to Vegas and I went to the strip club and, like, I screwed up. I ended up getting a blowjob from a stripper." Like, that is that okay, maybe that happens, but that's not typically what happens. Generally speaking, it's like you start to drift by doing things like starting to look at porn on a frequent
Mhm.
basis
Yeah.
when you don't feel satisfied sexually because you don't wanna talk to your spouse about it. Or you start to get to a point where you're, like, checking out girls at the gym, but then ruminating on those particular people or actually speaking to those women, right, in, like, a flirty manner or, like, in a way that
Mhm.
you're, like, sharing energy with them that you otherwise could and should be sharing with your wife. You know what I'm saying?
But I also think that I don't wanna take you down another path, but one of the things that stood out in the message, which I got something very different listening to you process it is so cool. But, like, one of the things that stood out was he really talked about, how it's not just a physical lust. It
Mhm.
can be an emotional share. So, I think
It
that,
always
like,
starts
you
with
also
emotional.
have to, like, hit on that point too, is that, like, when you're talking about protecting and sharing energy and giving something energy, it also could be an emotional
It always starts as
affair.
emotional. Yes. So what I'm saying is, like, it's always emotional first before it's physical. You know what I'm saying?
Right, but I think a lot of people confuse that, and I think that was part of his message that was really good, was that, like, a lot of people, when they think about lust, they think about physical lust,
Yeah, like sex. They just think
right?
about
They
sex.
think about, like, they go right there. I think specifically for, um and he talked a little bit about how, which was really good, about the difference between attraction and lust, right? And
Mhm.
appreciation, like you hit on a little bit. Um, but one of the things that really stood out for me was the shame and guilt associated with that, and
Mm,
that about how men as a culture specifically,
mhm.
they are taught and conditioned to feel shame and guilt about having these thoughts.
Right.
And the difference is that what lust is versus a like appreciation and attraction is that lust is actually acting on it. So let's bring back to your example of the gym. You see a woman that's like very like beautiful and you appreciate that and you don't engage in that, right? It's like
Yeah,
you go back to your set, like you
oh,
said.
you pass by and meet eyes, you say hi, it's fine.
Yes.
But if you're pursuing that energy, for example, you're like, "Wow, I wanna talk to this girl," and, like, act impressive or try to, like, connect with them, like,
Right.
okay, and you're a committed person,
But the
okay?
other side of it is that it's like, let's say it starts progressing what you said, like it's a physical attraction, but then it progresses, in my opinion, to the emotional side because there are many people that have relationships that they are lusting for someone else, but they're lusting for someone else's emotion, not their actual physical. Usually it progresses into a physical,
Well,
right?
especially as you mature in age, like, as a mature man, like, I don't just desire that, like, sexual act, like, it's
Mhm.
a whole series of emotional connections and, the desire to be wanted and to feel significant, that you can pleasure the other person, like, it's all wrapped up in that, right? It's
Yeah.
not just, like, getting my rocks off, you know what I'm saying? But y to
Can I share my
yeah,
perspective as a woman?
yes.
Okay. So one of the things that I feel is that like there's like for a woman, most women want attention in some, but they can get attention in different ways,
Mhm.
right? So it's when for a woman is like when it starts a slippery slope, I think is when you start to get that attention from someone and then it's filling a need that you don't have fulfilled in your actual relationship.
Right.
So it might not be like actual like, "Hey, you look beautiful." That might be it, but, like, for me, that's not something that needs to be fulfilled, but it's like, hey, like, paying attention to, like, thoughtfulness and, like, that sort of thing. So, when you what you're talking about, though, is that when those feelings come up is, like, how to protect basically, how to protect that and how to go back into your marriage and figure out, like,
Mhm.
"Hey, wait, how is that missing for me
Mm,
for us,
right.
and what do I do about it?"
You have to have a really safe marriage in order to share those thoughts. Like,
Yes.
I feel like I can come to you now, but we've been through a lot, be like,
Yeah.
"Hey, babe, listen, I
Mhm.
feel like I'm drifting." Like, I'm not gonna say like, "Oh my god, babe, I feel like I'm feeling the pull to porn lately."
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
saying like that.
No.
I will like you see it in my attitude. You can read me like a book, right? You like, okay, he's
Mhm.
getting a little pouty, he's a little sideways, like, what needs aren't being fulfilled for me. And for me, like you know, physical touch is my number one love language. And I like the affirmative, like talk from you that's like, hey, I appreciate you. Like, I notice you're doing this. Like, I like to be noticed by you. Right.
Yeah.
And then for you, like you're saying, you like to be like appreciated by me showing you that, whether it's like doing acts of service or, freeing you up with time and things like that. Just knowing that I'm thinking about you,
Mhm.
right? So, but these are the things we know together how to come back together, right? I think a lot of couples don't know like what it is they need to do to always come back together. And that's where the drift happens. And I'm saying from a man's perspective, if he's not being fed like sexually, the drift starts silently. Right?
Mhm.
It starts with things that are innocuous, and especially in our culture, um, there are things that we've, said that they're just, like, not a big deal. For example, like, I know I used to look at, like, something called the chive, right? It was like
Mhm.
Titty Tuesday and all these things was like, oh, all these hot chicks. And it's like, oh, it's no problem. It's just like a scroll Instagram kind of
You
thing.
used to
Titty
share them with me once in a while, like funny ones,
Sure.
but, like,
But yeah, it was like
I could
just
feel when you were on that thing a lot.
oh yeah, but I was like looking at other like beautiful women and like how does that make my wife feel when she knows that I'm looking at like other women? Like not good.
Yeah.
Like how would I feel if you were looking at like other hot guys online? I'd be like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like what's wrong with me?
But here's the messed up part.
You don't
No, no,
desire to
no.
do that. I know.
Women don't do that.
I know.
Most women don't do
I
that.
realize.
But I wanna bring it to an example that I think will be really good for our listeners, but also, like, that I think is really relatable, is, like, beyond the tribe, that's a good example, but what's even more is, like, you looking at other, like when we were really into CrossFit and, like, you would follow and you would watch,
Hmm.
like, other CrossFitters that were really,
Hot
very
hot women
hot,
CrossFitters.
sexy, lifting heavy shit, like
Well, that's
and
just kind of
I never
my
thought of
preference.
it,
Yeah.
but then I would follow them too. So
Mhm.
I would know, like, kinda like what you were seeing,
Sure.
right? And, I think that as a woman, like, I can super admire those women too,
Mhm.
but for a woman, the wiring works a little different.
That's the
The
comparison. Right?
It's the comparison, and then I started building this story of, like, I'm never enough, I'm not enough, I need to get better at this, I need to look like this, I need to,
Mhm.
like and I never went down this path, but I know many people that do, like, "Hey, man, she has boob implants, I need boob implants," like, like, all of that kind of stuff, and, um, it's very different, the psychology, and why I wanna bring this part up is that I think that you're talking about, like, a primal wiring, right? Like,
Mhm.
primal wiring is, like, for us both to reproduce, right? Which means an attraction needs to happen of some sort. So, I think that, that's, like, primal instinct, right? So, it's your primal instinct to want to have sex, and it's my primal instinct to want to look good to attract a mate.
Sure.
So I think what happens is that then we introduce, which Pastor Matt introduced the concept of like, like I only look at OnlyFans or like, like all these other things that are now come into the thing. Like Chive is a
Oh, yeah.
decade ago,
Like, I wouldn't
right?
stand a chance if I was in my 20s, like, there's no way. And here's the
Right.
thing is, like, young men so we're not talking about married people anymore, but young men, for example, like, they're bombarded with well, hold on. So there's just so much opportunity to not have to get out of their 4 walls in order to, like, pursue a woman, right? It's like, "Oh, I'll just stay home and jack off
It's
to
easy now. Yeah.
OnlyFans or like, Pornhub or whatever. It's so accessible and so easy to be able to just like satisfy yourself, even though after the fact you feel completely empty. Like there's no like emotional connection. So that's why like as you mature, you realize like, wow, I actually need this emotional connection when it comes to sex. And it's not just this like
Mhm.
feeling of orgasm, for example. And when you're masturbating to something that like is meaningless or like is just completely silly, then eventually that game gets old, right?
Mhm.
And if you don't build the skills and the ability to speak to people, right? If you don't you don't build not everyone is confident out of the womb, right? You have to get out there and like get uncomfortable and like connect with people of the opposite sex, right? If you're a
Mhm.
guy, you're connecting with women. And like that's all we ever did was like, hey, let's go get drunk and go to the bar.
Mhm.
Not that
Yeah.
that's a good
You're
idea.
making yourself old now.
Oh, I know, but that's how we would, like, get some liquid courage and just, like,
Mhm.
go talk to girls, right? That was so exciting. That was, like, the thing to do, but little did we know, it's like, okay, we're cutting our teeth to figure out, like, how to how to talk to the opposite sex,
Mhm.
and I feel like the opportunity to do that now is, like, you have to you have to you have to understand that you need to do that because it's
Yes.
natural.
So
It's
it's
natural to, like, look the other person in the eye, right? Talk, communicate, get to know somebody, and go through that whole game, but
Well, I think too is that what you're talking about is like basically the internet has made it so that you are stunting both men and women's growth, right? Because you're stunting it from a male's perspective, like you said, of like not even knowing how to interact with people.
Mhm.
And from a female perspective, you have access in the palm of your hand to so much comparison that you never ever had before, right? So it's stimulating two different sides of your psychology in terms of male and female. So, but what I think is really like critical is that like what Matt hit on about was like the Christian culture is typically shame and guilt around sex, right?
Mhm.
Like and which is very I think is a very unconscious programming. I don't think they did it intentionally. It's just like that's how depending on who's interpreted it, like
Well,
how you've
a
interpreted it,
while ago,
right?
they probably did to make sure, like, "Oh, you better not do this before you're married," right? That was
Right.
definitely
So that and that's where kind of that story comes in. But what I think is what I really took away from the message too is that like there's also shame and guilt around it for women, right? And so it's like he was starting to now start to really define what that is. And I think that you add that why I wanted to bring up the kind of the OnlyFans as an example is like, for example, this is so funny that I'm thinking about this right now, but when when I lived in California and I had a boyfriend in Vegas, and we used to go to Vegas every weekend, party it up, and, like, we would go to strip clubs, like, very frequently. Well, I became friends with one of the strippers. She was actually a real estate investor. She was banking her cash into buying properties. And, what's very interesting about this woman, her name was Melanie.
just entrepreneurial.
She was very entrepreneurial, and she was like, "There's no freaking business I can do that can accumulate cash like I'm accumulating being a stripper in Vegas to buy real estate."
Mhm,
And I've stayed in touch with her. She has built quite a real estate portfolio, but here's what's very interesting. One of the things that I had asked her when we started talking, just out of curiosity, I was like, "So do you have like a boyfriend?
mhm.
And like, how does it work when you have a boyfriend, but you're a stripper?" And she was like, "Oh, she's like, if you're a stripper, you really don't have relationships
Mm.
because she's like, it's really hard to shut off the not the attention you get and then get into a different space with someone. She's like, it's very common.
Well, never mind finding someone who's okay
Yeah,
with you as a professional showing off your naked body.
exactly. So, right. So, but what I'm bringing up here is that do you know many married women that have an OnlyFans page? I knew one,
Do you?
right? And then her marriage ended.
Yeah, shocker.
Right? So my point is that because from a woman's perspective, back to your point you wanted to talk about is you have to be so careful where you're exerting your energy because it has a cost,
Mhm,
right? And so I think that like bringing it back full circle is that like just even looking to like when you were talking about you and with the chive is like I could always tell like when you were watching porn.
yeah.
You know, like, I
Well,
could
how could you
always
tell?
tell, but I never had the courage to confront you
Mm,
because you would get really very,
very
like,
defensive.
defensive about it,
Well, how could you
right?
tell?
Because how did you know? How did you know that you would get defensive about it, right?
Well,
Because you knew because
because
you
I
felt guilt and shame about it
well,
because you were
guilt and
putting your
shame
energy around
definitely. Guilt and
someplace
shame
else.
about it, and then, I didn't wanna take responsibility for my part in, like, "Oh, she doesn't wanna have sex with me. She's not attracted to me.
Mhm.
She doesn't like sex," whatever it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's where I think that this conversation really can be helpful, and when it comes to your marriage is, like, what are some of those conversations that, like, A, you're afraid to confront, and B, are harder to have with you as a couple, and how do you start to shift that energy from out getting it from an external source and getting it right from the source?
Mhm. Well, I think first of all, you have to identify like where are you sharing energy that otherwise needs to be coming back internally, right? So social media is one of them.
Mhm.
Like I know for me, like I don't follow anybody on social media who is like titties out all the time. Now here's the problem. I follow a lot of fitness people. So like if I go to my search, immediately it comes up and it's like titty wonkas
Yeah.
everywhere. So I'm like, oh my God, it's embarrassing. But it is distracting because all the reels that show up that scroll by, it's all like, oh my God. That's why like I can't be on that too much anymore because it's just so distracting. But anyway, so social media is number one, I think. Just if you're sharing, you're watching, you're fantasizing, you are like admiring, you're just spending time like looking at other women other than your spouse, right? I think number 2 is it like, are you sharing energy with someone of the opposite sex during the week at any time? And I think the thing that comes up the most, I think, for a lot of people is like a training partner or someone at the gym.
Mhm.
right? And I think that's the most common way that affairs happen is because of like, hey, I'm working out with somebody of the opposite sex and
Spoken from experience.
spoken from experience. Exactly. So I think that's a big one. Where else? Where else would you say?
I mean, I think just like I said, subscribing to, like, porn type
Or
sites.
OnlyFans, right?
I mean, I think that,
OnlyFans, porn, social media.
and if that's part of your marriage where you guys watch porn together, I'm not talking about that,
Can
right?
we? We
And
could do that with me?
but, at the same time, is that, if it's, you have a subscription and even more so, if it's a secret,
Yeah. Then
right?
anytime you're holding secrets,
Then
it's no
anytime
good.
it goes back to basics of, connection and communication is, then that's probably something you need to look into and you need to kind of
Well, I think this
s
whole
check
the
yourself
whole
with.
thing, the whole burning our marriage to the ground by year 10, I think we decided to start over with the truth being the foundation of our marriage, right?
Mhm,
So, I think these are just examples of, like, lies, right? Lies that you tell yourself that, like, "This is no big deal. This doesn't
mhm,
matter. It's no it my wife, won't know about it. Like, if I jerk off to this, like, she's not gonna even know. Like, it doesn't matter."
yeah,
So those are, like, the minimizations or the lies that, like, I would tell myself, right? That I know that other people probably do as well.
mhm,
But here's the thing I've figured out over time is, like, that shit all matters. Like, you don't think it does,
mhm,
but it really matters. It comes out in your energy, like, whether you believe in karma or not, like, that whole, um I think, like, your subconscious is so powerful that your thoughts, they become things, and, if you're thinking about somebody else or some other thing more than you're thinking about your spouse and your family, like, that's going to show up,
mhm,
whether you know it or not, and you may not know how it does, but, the awareness of those things is where it starts.
mhm. I think it's, and a mentally healthy woman, I should say, is
Are
always
you one
going
of
to
those?
have. I am, at times. Um, is always gonna have an intuition. So here's, man, I wanna get so raw here, and I'm just gonna go for it. A woman fucking knows. Just like I knew when you were watching porn, but I chose to kinda, let it just be, right? At the beginning. A woman knows when you are looking at other women lustfully versus appreciation of their attraction.
Mhm,
And, um, a woman also knows when you're starting to walk down the path from lust to pursuing the lust.
mhm,
You can feel it.
mhm.
A mentally, like I said, mentally and emotionally healthy woman will feel that. The question is based on, is the woman willing to confront that?
Right, and is well, and
And
if so, like, you have the courage to do it. If it's the guy, for example, that's stepping out like
and
that.
hold on, the other side is because it is not just men that have this
Yes.
problem.
Yeah.
There is women that definitely pursue this lust.
Mhm.
Like I said, in this quest for attention that they're
Attention, yeah.
not getting from some other
Well,
source,
from their spouse.
from their spouse, right? So, the question is like when that person does get the courage to confront you, do you have the cojones to actually tell the truth about what's going on and
Right.
look at yourself in the mirror and say, "Hey, this is something that is taking my energy away from my spouse instead of in pouring into it."
Well, and I think a lot of the time, like I said, it starts silently and it evolves into something that before you know it is, like, off the cliff.
Yeah,
But
derailed.
yeah, so I think in a lot of cases when couples end up there, it's like it's a rock bottom, but it's like, is this repairable? Do you still want to be together? And, I don't think there's ever reconcile that can happen unless both parties take responsibility for their part in it.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think both of us, this is a perfect example of just, coming back to, doing your own work.
Mhm.
We have both done our own work together, but that doesn't mean that the wound doesn't come up at times. Right? Like, there was even an instance last week where we talked a little bit about it, and you were feeling so distant, and my mind went right away to, "Oh, maybe he's,
Something stupid.
doing something stupid." And and I had to get myself right with like, "Dude, no, that's not the truth. If you knew that if that was the case, you would know it," meaning me, talking to myself. Like, this was the conversation I had with myself. But I also had the courage to actually say something to you about it this time, which I didn't have a couple years ago.
Yeah, it maybe doesn't come out as like
It
a
doesn't
nice
come out as
conversation.
nice,
I wish it did.
definitely. But here's the thing, that's part of my work is me not filtering how it's going to like, how you're gonna feel and me expressing how I feel. So I
Well, and
think
this is
that
where therapy comes in handy.
yeah,
I
this is
think because
definitely
we're
where therapy.
definitely not qualified to like, here's what to do in that
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
case.
and I'm
So,
not saying I'm not telling people what to do by any means, but, like, what I'm saying is that this is also a good reminder of, like, when you have to do your work and the other person has to be willing to do theirs,
mhm,
and I love the saying, "Willingness is worthiness," and sometimes I think about that saying and I'm like, I don't even know what that means when I say it, but, like, it's something that I always come back to is that just, like, the willingness to take a look at yourself, the willingness to, um, have a conversation that might be a hard conversation. I think that I can't remember who it was that said it to us. It was probably Garrett, but, like, it was, like, one comment he just dropped this bomb one day where it was like, "You're only one hard conversation away from a breakthrough," or something like that.
mhm.
And I think about that saying often is like, when I am starting to feel something, but I'm getting a little bit frightened to, like, actually say it to you or actually confront you with it. I'm a low confrontation personality. I know that about myself. It takes me a lot of time and courage to build up to having that conversation. But then once I have that conversation, sometimes it doesn't go well. Sometimes it takes multiple conversations, but just the actual courage to get to that point where I could confront it is huge. So maybe that's where we need to kind of bring this with like, what are you giving your energy to? Is you might have to have the courage to look at like, hey, what are places that I'm giving my energy someplace else other than my spouse?
Especially if you're not getting the results you want, I think sexually or intimately as
Mhm.
both people, like male and female, but if your sex life is like struggling or whatnot, I think this is a really good place to start just to figure out like, hey, where are we drifting in our lust, right?
Mhm.
So, and it could be those situations, and it might be the guy who's more the guilty party there. It might be the wife, right?
Yeah.
It's coming together and having a really honest conversation. And here's the thing: is like you can take responsibility if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to take that seriously and do something about it, then just like you don't even have to have the conversation, just watch what happens, right? Just by taking action on something as small as like just unfollow, all those women that are like distracting to you.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I remember when you started doing that, started unfollowing those people, and you didn't, like,
how did you know?
you didn't,
How
like,
how did
say
you
it,
know?
but also too, it made me clean up my feed too, because I was
Mhm,
like I would go through my feed. I remember this so clearly. It was 2 instances that I can remember that I did it. One was after I had given birth, and I was just looking at other women, comparing myself to where I was not, and it was making me feel so effing shitty about myself
mhm,
that I just started unfollowing people. I was like, "That person is not." Now my feed is full of people that are older women that are really fit, that are like I don't look at people that are in their 20s and be like, "Hey, I wish I could do that
mhm.
anymore." But at that time, it took me a little bit to actually get to that point. Um, but I think that, like, even that for me was really freeing, but, like, knowing that, like, you now, like now if you are on your phone and, like, I can sometimes see what you're scrolling, like, I don't see, you know, big ass
Big ass what?
naked
What?
women, half naked women,
I am an ass guy, that's for
doing
sure.
burpees, you know?
Well, yeah. I think that if you want to know if here's the test. Okay, so I'm gonna
Mhm.
leave. We're gonna end this conversation with one test.
Okay, let's do it.
If you cannot leave your phone out in the open in your house
Mm,
without
that's a good
worrying
one.
that your spouse is gonna see something on the phone or see a notification or a text message or like something you're scrolling on or something you're hiding, like you are fucking. lying to
Yeah.
yourself and you're lying to your spouse. And
Mhm.
that is the like right there, that is the beginning of the future of some really bad shit,
Yeah.
right? It's going to happen. Like you can't fucking hide forever,
Yeah.
right? It's going to happen. So like that's the place to start.
Yeah, I think that's a really good place. And here's the thing is that, like, it goes back to, like, when you start doing the work, other people start kinda, like, falling in line. You start clearing space for people that are in alignment with you versus, you know, giving yourself another distraction. And it's like I said, I could remember when I started noticing that you were cleaning up your feed. And I never said anything about it, I don't think, but, like, I could feel your energy shift just by you doing that, right? Just like I said, when you were watching a lot of porn, I knew it,
A lot.
right? But, like, at the same time, now I'm like, "Oh," I was like, and I can always tell when you kinda, like, start to entertain that path, but then you kind of now you have a better compass. You kinda bring it back in, you reel it back in, and we can have a conversation. Like, did you ever think we would be friggin' doing a podcast, having a conversation about this?
No. Of
Right?
course not. No,
So
of course not. But I
this
just
is
like I've learned everything the hard way, like I said. So if this could save anybody like the future heartache and destruction of like whether it's their marriage or whether it's like you wasting months and months of just being disconnected with your
yeah,
spouse, like
drifting,
you're
drifting.
drifting, yeah, it's worth it.
Yeah, I think so too.
So you close it up.
All right. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Um, I am shocked that we went there, but I like it at the same time. And if you found it helpful, please share it with someone that might also benefit from listening to this conversation.
Mm.
And as always, are growing with our listeners rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast. And we're thankful for you.
Very much so. And eventually we'll find like a better backdrop and setting for our podcast because I know right now it's like it's a little ghetto as far as we got a nice little studio, but it's like a nook in our in it looks like
We're making it work.
looks like we're in an attic. But anyway, we're hoping that we can upgrade at some point very soon so it's more visually appealing. But we appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.